as we walk past this super racist statue. And he said, "Oh, I wasn't sure if you were going to say anything." And I thought to, but then I thought, man, don't say anything, keep it professional. And I said, I think that's the problem, that we're equating professionalism with the status quo and not calling out racist, sexist behaviors and actions. And that we pretend that neutral is somehow more professional. And he just looks at me and gives me this high five. He goes, "And that's why you're my girl and why I want to work with you."
Building a successful real estate career requires you to adapt, pivot, and constantly master new skills.
We're Katie and Daniel Steinfeld. We've built our own innovative brokerage, and in this podcast, we've assembled actionable tips and strategies that you can implement to take your business to its maximum potential.
It's time to level up. Level up. Level up.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Level Up. Today, we are with a very special guest. Dr. Laura Morlock is here with us today. We'll give her a bit of an introduction, and then we're really excited to get into this conversation. So Laura is a realtor with RE/MAX AB Realty in Stratford, specializing in historic and distinctive properties, helping people relocate to the magical city of Stratford, and leading sales at the new Ridgeview Homes Knightbridge development in the city. Her business is built to empower women through real estate, both those within the industry and those we serve. Before she began her career in real estate, she earned her PhD in diversity, gender, and dress from the University of Waterloo, where she focused on how women's bodies are interpreted and debated in Canadian public spaces through the clothes they wear. Laura still teaches at Toronto Metropolitan University's School of Fashion, writes, and gives talks on these subjects. And thank you, Laura, for coming. We're so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I mean, I love you both, and I've loved your podcast for a long time.
Thank you very much. And we had Laura join us for our team meeting, our brokerage team meeting last week. And the topic we're discussing today is centering around diversity, more specifically on gender, and creating boundaries in the real estate industry as female realtors. And we couldn't think of a better person to have come on and talk to us about this. So we really appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm just so excited to talk about it. It's like, the intersection of all my favorite topics pretty much here.
All coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So nice. We wanted you twice.
That's right. An academic realtor so nice, you had to talk to her twice.
Yeah,
That's right.
Exactly.
Well, that's it. There's so many things to unpack, but I think just really high level, maybe if we dive in a bit to just the work, like where the intersection was, and you got into real estate, and like Katie said, I mean, you specialize in this space as well as your area, but like where have you seen, I guess, both the challenges and opportunities that brought you to this place, and that you're able to make what you know a service to the community that you serve and everybody who's listening to you right now as well?
Oh my gosh, what a great question, because it's both the challenges and opportunities. It's like we have a 3-hour podcast here, right? Like, we can talk.
This is Joe Rogan.
I need 3 hours. Yeah, that's right. I need 3 hours to answer this one question, and then we can go on to the second one. So I'll talk about challenges first. So coming from the academic world is by no means perfect. It's full of people, and people have unconscious biases and conscious biases and all the rest. But it is a space where it is assumed that you believe in gender equity, racial equity, minoritized equity, and that you are actively working to create safer spaces in your classrooms, on your committees and hiring, all of that. So by no means perfect, but that's just sort of a given baseline that you're coming from. And then as soon as I started taking real estate courses, there were so many little and big things I noticed immediately that were honestly shocking to me. Now, like, I know that I'd spent my adult life in the academic world, but I also do live in the real world, and I worked with the public a lot in my work. So, it wasn't that I didn't know that sexism exists in the real world. I was just a little shocked to encounter it so blatantly in professional spaces, like real estate boardrooms and course materials. So micro things like how, when people speak in terms of scripts and Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that is so heteronormative to assume that a couple is a man and a woman to start with. B, I am in a heterosexual marriage and I'm not Mrs. I mean, I'm doctor and I do enjoy saying that, but I don't have the same last name as my husband, and a lot of women don't have the same last name as their husbands anymore. Like, this is 2023. Like, what year are we at? 2023. And so it's not that it's wrong to call a couple Mr. and Mrs. whatever, Peterson. It is wrong to assume that couple means hetero and that a married spouse goes by Mrs. And that's very outdated thinking, really. But that's a micro thing, right? Like, these are the little cues that you encounter in talks. I would say sort of the middle of the road problems, challenges I was seeing, or blindness. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Missing things in your field of vision. I'm a researcher by nature. I love data. So of course, right as I was thinking of getting into real estate, as I was beginning to study, I was just eating up as much information as I could, and I still do. But I was watching tons of keynote addresses and following all kinds of people on YouTube, and I was watching all these extremely successful top producing agents, particularly in the States, because that's where most of the content comes from, but definitely Canadians too. And my training for 15 years was to look at who's in the room. If we're having conversations, you never just take it for granted. You are always asking kind of bird's eye questions, like, who's at the table, who's saying that, what is their context of saying that? And again, it's not to have a negative slant on any, it's just, you always need to kind of look behind what's right in front of you as an academic when you're researching. So I'm looking at all of these people giving these talks, and all of them giving this message of, this is the formula to being a millionaire. This is the formula to being a 7-figure earning realtor. This is the formula to being top in sales. And they're going through their day and they're going through this. And then how many of them end with, if I can do it, trust me, you can do it. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe in working very hard. I'm a very competitive agent. It's a huge part of why I love real estate. But I'm looking at it going, how odd that all of these people saying this are white men. Are you saying that female agents, there are a few female agents that were giving these talks, and there are many female agents who are very successful. I'm not saying they're not, but if I can do it, you can do it. Well, how come all the eyes in this sample group are white men? And when people are asked in these podcasts, like, yeah, like this whole hustle culture, and it's like, why don't you think these other agents do it? And so they don't want it enough. They're not working hard enough. They're just not willing to pull up and do the grit. And the gender, activist academic in my brain immediately goes, is that what you think? That Black single female moms in Chicago who are realtors don't work as hard as you do, don't want it as badly as you do, don't have the discipline that you do? So when I look at a field like that and I see that the vast majority of the people giving these talks, hosting these channels, hosting these conventions are white men, my question immediately becomes, why? What are the barriers that are preventing male agents of color, they're there on the stage too, but not in as high degree, female agents of color? And I started tracking this because I can't help it, I'm a nerd through and through. And the vast majority are white men, seconded by men of color, followed by white women, and a very distant fourth are women of color on those real estate stages. So that's sort of that middle of the road. It's not that no one is saying, oh, we don't want, a Latina agent on the stage talking. It's like, well, who are the agents that make these numbers? Oh, they're these people. Oh, those people are men. Oh, those are white men mostly. Yeah. Why? What are the barriers that exist that are holding everybody else back in extra ways? And then lastly, I would say the more specific, direct things that shocked me. That didn't shock me because that is how the business world looks. Like, that's not just, none of this is just real estate. That is, look at Fortune 500 companies. Like, that's the business world. But sitting in a meeting and hearing female agents referred to, actually it was a video, female agents referred to as skirts. And hearing in a brokerage meeting, an older gentleman was just referencing that someone who was working with him chose to work with him and explained to him, in this newspaper ad, there were a lot of pretty faces, but I decided what I really needed was experience. And that baseline assumption that the male face, it was presented as this joke, like, oh, he has an ugly mug, ha ha ha, this older guy. But that baseline assumption was that pretty, i.e. female, doesn't equal experience, whereas older white man in this case, does equal experience. And the client had zero idea how long anybody in that ad had been in real estate. He didn't know if the 35-year-old woman had been an agent for 15 years and this man in his 50s had been an agent for 4 months. It's that baseline assumption of default. Who has the expertise? Who do we assume to hold expertise without consciously thinking about it?
Yeah.
So that's a long answer to your question, but I kept it under 3 hours.
Great
that was just the
job.
challenges. You asked me about the benefits too, which is really important. And we should go to that because that's what I build my business on too. But some of the challenges.
Yeah, no, it's such a hard thing. And that awareness piece, I think for everybody is really important. And I know when we were talking in our brokerage meeting, we talked about beforehand, like, do we just have the women talking about it or do we bring the men into the conversation as well? Because we can talk all we want or make these, we notice these things and point them out as we go along in our lives because it happens all the time to us. But we really need allies, both male and female. Yes. And that was another conversation as well that was really interesting that I'd love to have your take on, is just also, it's not just men that make these assumptions. It's everyone, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you find challenges in that? Because I think that's a big assumption a lot of times, like, oh, it's always these white men that are making these assumptions, but it's everybody.
100%. And I'm really glad you highlighted that because kind of putting on the academic lecture hall hat just a little bit more. And so, sorry, but we talk about terms of the patriarchy, right? The system as it exists, which prioritizes men as basically what it means is men are the baseline. That if you are a man, that means white man. But if you are, it's doctor or it's female doctor, or it's, oh, I have this friend, oh, I have this black friend. Like, it's this sort of baseline assumption that the so-called neutral human is the white straight male, and anything else requires a modifier, a female scientist, a gay politician, a black friend, these things. Okay, so that's the baseline of the patriarchy. And one of the things that's really important to understand is that patriarchy harms everybody. It doesn't just harm women. It's extremely catastrophically damaging to men. I highly recommend everybody watch The Mask We Live In, The Mask I Wear. I think it's The Mask We Live In.
Say not The Mask. That won't teach people.
No, that's different. Yeah, Jim Carrey is great, but it's going to teach different things. Yeah. But it's talking about the messages that young boys and young men are getting and how harmful they are to their mental health, their physical health, to all these things. So it is not by any means a one-way street. Secondly, women absorb the messaging too. It's not like we are born with some filter over our ears that makes us recognize that the default shouldn't be white and male. We have to learn that. And, people, male and female and of all genders, do, intuit and experience things. But something that I shared in the brokerage meeting with you was that I can say in my own experience, in grad school especially, the people who were the most supportive of me, had my back, and made sure I graduated were men, white straight men for that matter. And the people who made my life really more challenging and made it really hard to graduate and made me question whether or not I belonged there were, without exception, women. And I'm talking about like senior scholars. Now, I also had amazing female faculty who supported me. I'm not, 100%. But the point is that women have absorbed the exact same, when I say the exact same messaging, I don't mean about themselves. I mean the exact same narrative as young men have. And as a result, they absolutely perpetuate the exact same stereotypes, microaggressions, assumptions, biases. It is not like women don't hold racist assumptions or sexist
Yeah.
assumptions. It is not like because you're a woman, you can't be sexist. It's, which is actually sexist in and of itself to assume that women are all nurturing and all enlightened or all, any of it. And likewise, what we see happen is when there isn't enough space in the room and it doesn't feel like there's going to be more space, the people, in this case women that we're talking about, often end up going after each other rather than after the men because they want to protect their spot in the room. And this is almost entirely subconscious, but they will go after other women. They will see other women coming up as a threat because there aren't enough slices of this pie and I worked my butt off to get this pie. There's also an entitlement of, I went through this brutality of a system, you have to too, to earn your spot here. And they also want to feel accepted with their male colleagues. I'm not like other girls, I'm one of the guys. That's supposed to be a real positive. I'm not like other girls is a positive statement. Why is that a positive statement? Like, what a horrible way to align ourselves. But we do it and we say it because there doesn't feel like I can stay in the room if I soften, if I'm welcoming, if I let her in. I might lose my spot or I might not be seen as strong.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done that myself through the years. Like I'll look at women that walk into the room and I'm like my immediate reaction, it's so subconscious. Like I'm not even thinking about why I'm reacting that way. But when you start taking notice, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is how I've been like taught to act with other women in the room. And it's horrible. So you're right. Like it can be such a challenge when you don't feel like you're supported with the same people that, you'd figure you'd be getting support from those people. And that can be a really tough thing, a tough pill to swallow.
I think it also points to the allyship that you were talking about and the importance of it. And it's dangerous territory. I'm not comparing women to dogs. Okay, I love dogs. I'd be happy to compare it to a dog. But I often think about, I have a really large dog. And when she was a puppy and we were in training, I was talking with our trainer who I did years of training with. And she said she's never in 30 years of training been bitten by a large dog. She's always bitten by small dogs. And I was like, what? And she said, it's because big dogs are sure of themselves. They know they're big. They don't have the need to prove it to anybody. So the little dogs, especially the way that we treat little dogs, makes them insecure. And so they feel the need to lash out to protect themselves. And I think that is why male allyship is so important in one way, because a lot of these straight white men, and I don't say that in any way negatively, like one of our first conversations you and I ever had, Katie, we were joking, like, I'm very fond of straight white men. I'm married to one. My entire family is full of them. It's just not, there's another one here on the call with us who's a lovely human being. But when you have that position of comfort, I think a big part of why my male senior faculty were so supportive of me is because they didn't feel threatened by me at all, and not in a negative way. Like they saw me in a positive light, but I mean, they had the confidence in themselves and in their position to have no qualms about making sure that I got the grant or got the opportunities, And I think that when we can help men see that we are all fish in water, and now let's look at the water and let's not just assume that this is how everybody lives and the way it should be, they can often tap into going, oh, okay, because we need the male allies to make things change. I always say women would never have gotten the vote if male politicians hadn't voted to give women the vote. So likewise, we need our male friends to call out sexist jokes, to say, are there any women on this panel? Because I'm not going to sit on a manel, which is a panel of only men, how much are you getting paid? Because I'm getting paid this, when men lean into this too, oh man, like sky's the limit.
Oh, let me lean into it then a bit.
Yes, please do.
I totally agree with and I guess it's not every case, but the fact that people who are threatened or feel threatened are more likely to get on the defensive, or in some cases an offensive, in such a way that it can be detrimental to what we're trying to achieve here on the whole. And so one of those, maybe this is ageism on my part, but where do you see, like you mentioned, senior women who are making things difficult for you because maybe they were threatened by somebody who's very capable and like them. And for a lot of people who are older, they get threatened by the new young bucks coming in who are going to take
Right.
over. What's the female version of a buck? A doe? I'm saying young buck. But you know what I mean? So it was the same thing. Even in a previous life, I worked for a football team, which you can imagine is a very male, testosterone driven environment. And by the way, our absolute number one best salesperson of all time was an Indigenous woman, for what it's worth. But when she entered, it was difficult from the older folks. I feel like there is still, and it's apparent, like you said, people are being taught and younger people are being brought up, which is very dangerous according to these mindsets that need to shift. But is the challenge right now focusing on the younger, and I use younger loosely, like let's say the generation that isn't older, which is also subject to interpretation.
It changes every year with my birthday, I find.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, I say that still thinking I'm a young person, but it's all subject to who's listening to me and what they think. But I guess as we try to take advantage of these opportunities to change the conversation and to build people's awareness, the focus should be everywhere. But do you find that it's more effective to focus on those who aren't kind of the people who have been brought up for 60, 70 years thinking such and focusing on younger folks? Or is that the wrong way to look at it? And we need to be going to these people who might really be perpetuating things from the old age down to everybody else?
That is such an interesting question. And I don't think there's a straightforward answer. I definitely see differences in the groups that I speak with, to the questions that they have, to the concerns that they have, particularly because in my academic work, in that life, I deal with much more controversial topics like Muslim women's niqab and debates over the niqab or the hijab. And the questions and statements that, like one place that I gave a few public lectures, University of Guelph holds this, I forget the name of it, but it's a series for seniors to take in lectures. And then at the University of Waterloo, my class is full of students anywhere from 18 years old to 70 years old. At Toronto Metropolitan University, without exception, all of my students are Gen Z. And one of the challenges I've always found in giving, say something like this, a podcast, it's harder because I'm not sure who's going to listen to it. And I have different conversations to have with a downtown Toronto queer Black feminist activist than I do with a senior white Christian 7th generation Canadian in a small farming community in Southern Ontario. To be clear, that doesn't mean that one is more open-minded than the other, because we leftist progressives can be absolutely as close-minded as the most conservative people. It's what I'm pushing them on. I always push people that I talk to, and it's which areas I'm pushing them on to consider. And I would say that Gen Z fascinates me. All of my students and both my kids are teenagers, and they're all Gen Z. And they're going to sort the whole gender thing out for us. Not really, but I mean,
I agree with that. Yeah.
You know,
seems like they've got it figured out a little better than most other people do so far.
Seriously. And now in human rights movements, you always see the pendulum swing. And so it goes from this extreme to this extreme, and it takes a while before you can have nuanced conversations here, which is why I say if I'm talking to people over here or people over here, I'm working on making both of them see things differently than they take for granted, but it's different conversations. Likewise, I absolutely have people who are 50 plus, 60 plus, and 70 plus who are the most gender forward, gender activists, progressive, and many, I'm almost even going to say most, but I think about that, are white men. So it's not a default. However, I think it has to be a holistic answer. I mean, there's the macro of how we deal with these issues, and it can be anything from legislation to ensuring that, people have a legal spot at the table. But it's also what really affects change, and we see this. A big part of my my studies is in history of human rights, in case you can't tell. And what we've seen over the centuries, what really makes change is organic relationship. you know? And like you're talking about, if a Black woman goes into a male change room to talk to them about male allyship and feminism, in the Canadian context, and I do want to say, because I know you have listeners across North America, the Canadian context is quantifiably different than the States. In so many ways. We have different histories, we have different cultural mores, we respond differently when we disagree to something than American audiences do. And that's not to say one's better than the other, but they are different. So I'm talking the Canadian context right now. And what I hear a lot is the audience will be polite, they will be receptive, they'll clap and they'll say thank you, and that's the conversation. Whereas when it's a male ally in the room, they will say things that they won't say. They will ask questions that they won't ask of the Black feminist woman, because they don't want to seem sexist. They don't want to seem like jerks, but they don't know how to approach that, which is why, again, we need male allies to, in the change room while lacing up the hockey skates, say, dude, that joke's not funny. And that's hard. That is not an easy thing to do at all for anybody, because you don't want to be that person, you know, and you don't want to start a fight, and you don't want to, you know, all the rest. But what we find is that when someone can actually bring themselves in that change room with their old friends that go back to when they were 10 years old, say something as simple as, dude, that joke's not funny. Other men in the change room will come up to them later and say, thank you for saying something. I was uncomfortable. Like, if there's 10 men in the room, 9 of them are uncomfortable, but no one wants to be that guy, you know?
It's so hard. It really is. And like, I even noticed it, like when something racist is said, like, you know, it's like, there's such a spectrum of responses you can have. And a lot of times I'll just chicken out and be like, you know, that was wrong, but I won't say it to their faces. And you know, feel bad off afterwards. But I think, you know, bringing it back to real estate, that's a challenge. I think, you know, whether you are, you know, a Black or brown person or a woman, a lot of times these things are said and we don't know how to react to them, especially if they're our own clients. Because, you know, it's a challenge, and it seems very unfair when you're that person they're talking about. Like if somebody said my client says a sexist thing to me, and, you know, I don't want to lose the business, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to work with this person, like they're sexist. So I know, like it's such a personal decision, I guess. But what kind of advice can you give people to handle those situations, or just put themselves more at ease?
That is such a tricky question, or rather such a tricky situation. And I do think that real estate leaves people particularly vulnerable in ways that other industries don't all. I'm not saying there are none others, but you know, and we have a friend and a colleague, and she's a Black, successful female Toronto realtor. And she told me when we were talking about this, she said, my race never mattered. I've lived in Toronto my whole life. It never mattered until I became a realtor. And I've heard, you know, beginning in this, I wanted to know, like, who else is looking into this? Who's writing about this? Who's talking about this? And this was pre-George Floyd. So it's happened more since then, but not great and not nuanced. But what I found were YouTube videos of white men or Italian men saying, well, yeah, you know, people won't work with me because I'm white. And this was American context again, but, you know, it is different for minoritized and racialized people in the space, and the numbers don't lie on that. And so, yes, I'm sure that there are male agents who someone didn't want to work with them because they were a man, or a white agent who someone didn't want to work with them because they were white. Racism exists and sexism exists. It doesn't mean that white people or men are immune from, you know, prejudice. But the difference, the quantifiable difference in threat and experiences and daily microaggressions just don't even come close to comparing just in quantifiable numbers. So when you're experiencing that, there's a difference between whether you are a bystander or you're the subject. So if it's me and it's my client, for example, I want to preface this by saying I agree 100% with what you said. It's a personal decision. Everyone has to determine for themselves, A, what they're willing to do for their business, B, where their own personal safety is, because that's something we haven't talked about yet, but that was a huge part of the red flag for me going into real estate. I'm learning all these things and I'm like, oh, where am I being taught about safety? Like, and this was pre-pandemic. So it's like driving in a car with a male who's basically a stranger going into a house with a male who's a stranger. Like, my father was a police officer, and I just have like all these, you know, alarms going off about how dangerous the situations we put ourselves in are so often. So safety, I believe, has to come first. No deal is worth your physical safety, your mental well-being, or your life. So that's kind of the caveat. Then beyond that, real estate is so competitive and so about hustle, and it's all about meet the people and then trade real estate with those people, you know. And if you don't do the deal, someone else is going to get the deal. And even if you thought you were doing the deal, maybe somebody else is doing the deal, you know. And so it's very hard, especially when we have so many messages our whole lives as women in our head. And I would argue also for racialized and minoritized people, be the good, you know, be the ideal immigrant, be the, you know, don't be the angry Black woman, etc. To be pleasant, to smile, to laugh it off, to not cause a commotion, to not be a problem. Don't be that problem agent. Don't be that problem person. Don't be the person that no one wants to work with you. You know, there's that really famous Harvard study where they asked the students to assess this report, and everyone assessed the boss, who was a male, as really empowering, really strong leader. I'd love to work for him. And then they did the same report exactly, but just changed the name from a male name to a female name. And they found, you know, she was effective at her job, but I wouldn't want to work for her. She's not very likable. She's pushy. She's aggressive, the B word, you know. So you're working already uphill against unconscious biases. And I think that how everybody deals with that has to be based on their own personal, I mean, when you're the recipient of it, your own personal values, preferences, comfort levels, business models. In my case, I think that I am such an overtly outspoken feminist that stops a lot of it at the door before it comes, because they know I'm not going to laugh at the joke. I've made that pretty clear. And I don't think I'm aggressive. I'm a pretty nice person generally. But when you're not afraid to, through various actions, through your language, through little tells, you know, in the same way there are little tells that are sexist, there are little tells that say, that's not my mindset.
Yeah.
I've had buyers reach out to me multiple times saying, I looked at your material online. We're a queer couple. We feel like we'll be safe with you. I'm a straight white woman, and they feel safe with me because of the language I'm using and because they know they're not going to have to come into the space where they're made to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. So I do think you can lead with a persona, with a brand. And aside from I actively get business from it. I'm not saying you should do it to get business, but I mean, I'm saying that it doesn't hurt your business. Yeah. At the same time, I was, my very first client was a friend, business owner. He's a racialized man. And we were viewing this property, and there was a really racist statue on the property, and a different race than his. And we walked past it heading into the backyard, and like we were talking, so like it's kind of a double take. And then as we walked back out, I was still talking about the yard, and I said, and as we walked past this super racist statue, and he said, oh, I wasn't sure if you were going to say anything. And I thought too, but then I thought, you know, man, don't say anything, keep it professional. And I said, I think that's the problem, that we're equating professionalism with the status quo and not calling out racist, sexist behaviors and actions. And that we pretend that neutral is somehow more professional. And he just looks at me and gives me this high five. He goes, and that's why you're my girl and why I want to work with you. And I was like, I had no idea. And that's not a story like, oh, I'm so great. It's to say that I think people think they will lose business by naming racism, by saying that's not funny, by being overtly what their values are. And I believe that, yeah, you will. In the same way that if you specialize in suburban new development, you'll lose business on, you know, a heritage manor. We all have niches that we work to. And the truth is that the majority of Canadians do believe in gender equality, consider themselves not racist, and hold those values. So if they experience you espousing those values, and again, I'm not saying you have to give a TED talk, but just, you know, casual conversation, your handle, whatever, I think we have to remember we're working with people. And people are already aware of these conversations. People already want to do better in these fields. And so we shouldn't assume again that that mysterious neutral client out there wants to tell sexist jokes, wants to laugh at racist things. And that when it's directed at you, with all of that lead up, I believe it is 100% appropriate to tell the client, that's not funny. Or if you don't want to be that direct, my go-to is asking questions. But it's oh, I don't get that. Why is that funny? Can you explain that joke to me? Sorry, I'm not getting it. Can you explain it? You watch people backpedal. And you can be totally innocent and non-confrontational.
I didn't say that. You said it. I don't know.
Exactly. It's like, sorry, why is that? Or how would that be different if it was a man? I don't get it. You know? So
I mean, I think
good.
you just like, there's so many things you unpack there that are so relevant. Like, just even down to the point of what you're saying, that we align ourselves with our people, so to speak. And I
yes.
use that with big air quotes, but that in itself, it's not the solution to the battle, but it is indicative of, I think, why it's valuable to be who we are and to speak out about what's
Yes.
important to us, because it's not going to drive people away. In fact, it might bring people in who otherwise wouldn't have aligned with you. And another interesting thing, just from the story you told about the statue, I think people always equate calling things out as sucking the air out of the room. And the way you called it out, although it was with someone who was on the same page as you, it was done in such a way that was, it was poking fun at the offensive thing. And that's not the way everybody's going to deal with it. And it might not be everybody's brand or the way they choose to talk about things. But I think it's important that people realize this isn't always about being, Mr. or Mrs. Negative or Dr. Negative.
100%. My new handle, Dr. Negative.
Yeah, Dr. Negative.
Dr. No sense of humor.
Dr. Real.
I like that. Yeah.
So when people are in these situations, I mean, there is, I think the answer is there's no right answer, because like you said, it does depend on people's mindset. But it kind of seems like a series of forks in the road where, if something comes up, the first decision is, do I call it out? Do I not? And then once you do, or if you do, what's that response going to be like? And how do you react to the response? Because people may not always take what you're saying as, man, I'm an idiot, I'm sorry, let's move on. People might
100%.
stick with their story and say, well, that's just how I am. Or or I'll tell you why I think it's funny, which is even more offensive, right? So at some point that decision comes in of like, is this a person I want to continue with? Like, if they're not saying they want to dump you or anything like that because you have the right idea, and this is, I mean, we're all saying it's the right idea. To them, it's not the right idea.
Right.
At what point, and again, I guess it depends, but like, at what point do we say, this isn't where we should be, safety wise, or even just what we continue to hear as a bystander or as the subject?
I think that is so great to ask, because I think that I love your description that it's multiple forks in the road. And as much as, yes, I am known as a rather outspoken, opinionated woman, especially when I'm talking on the subject, you know what? A lot of people don't know anything about that I even have a PhD or that I work in female empowerment or any of that. Like, I'm just selling their house and it never really comes up. And so if a joke comes up in that area or whatever, and as you say, someone does double down, I haven't encountered that personally. However, I do not yet know a realtor, even the best of the best, who hasn't at some point had to fire a client, or who has been fired by a client, probably both. And maybe it's because they are an impossible person to work with. Maybe it's because you just really can't, like, what they're looking to buy just really isn't what you do. Like, there's 1,000 different reasons. I believe this is a legitimate reason to fire a client, or vice versa, if that feels like the right choice to you. If you're like, okay, this is just, every time I see this dude, it's the racist jokes, it's the sexist, it's the homophobia, it's whatever, I would be so uncomfortable in that environment, and I don't want to argue with, I'm not here to have a fight. And a lot of the little micro things that I'm kind of referring to, in every one of those circumstances, it's always weighing the pros and cons. If you're going to call something out, why, and in what way, and to what purpose. And I really actually am a believer in call in culture, not call out culture. Naming and shaming, I'm not a fan of. I think that I really do believe, after all of these years, that most people want to do good. They want to be a good person. They see themselves as a good person. They want no one. There are not a lot of people in the world who would tick the boxes. I want to be a racist. I want to be a sexist. But their argument is, I'm not a racist. I just think X, Y, Z, right? So at that point, I think you have to decide for yourself, is this someone that I can work with? Or am I just going to make some money by referring them to a colleague, because I still make some money at the end of the day. I don't think I'm here, I'm not going to be the best fit for you in this, because my visceral gritting of my teeth and scowling at you is just, it's going to start wearing on you and me, and we're just, by the end of it could be a wrestling match and I'll win and you'll be embarrassed. So I think it's best we both go our own ways. But we began all this with you, Daniel, asking me about the challenges but also the opportunities. And I think the real estate as an industry is circa 1989, 1992 in terms of its progressiveness. I really believe that. And it's starting to have conversations that we weren't even 3 years ago. And again, every area of North American society, post George Floyd, post the protests in the States, Black Lives Matter, all this, I do think people are trying. When I say hop on the bandwagon, I don't mean that in a negative way. I think people are more aware maybe than they once were. And frankly, after the graves have been found at residential schools, the number of people in Canada, frankly, it's about Indigenous individuals and Indigenous issues. And they can have a whole other podcast about what it means to be a realtor, buying and selling property that was never ceded. This is not ceded territory. That where I live and work, this is not ceded territory. So there's a whole other moral conversation to be had there that I won't go into today, but nor is it really my place to do. But that said, the number of people who said to me after that, I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't really get it before. And there's been a quantifiable shift. So I think we can ride that wave. And at the same time, even before all that, what I see in real estate, the numbers go in both directions for us as women. One, there are actually more female agents than there are male in Canada. However, there are far more male broker of records than there are women. So again, why? Why are we seeing more men as brokers, as the coaches, as the speakers? There are lots of women who do it. Katie, I believe you're a broker of record. But I'm not saying women can't do it or don't do it. I look at the numbers and ask why. Why is it so skewed towards men? When they give the talks and it's at 7 a.m. I'm at 5 a.m. I'm at the gym, and at 7 a.m. I'm making client calls, and at 9 a.m. I'm training, and at 7 p.m. I'm like, who drops the kids off for school? Who picks them up? Who's taking them to soccer practice? Because clearly, and a lot of these people have children, so I'm like, it's clearly not you. So all of that said, real estate, both within the industry and for our clients, has huge potential to empower women. One of my absolute favorite financial gurus, Gail Vaz-Oxlade, Toronto, says that no woman should ever have to stay in a relationship because she can't afford to leave. And anyone who's watched the Maid series on Netflix, about coercive control and about how many, because again, men can be in abusive relationships too, 100%, but women, and I use that term inclusively for people who identify in the female spectrum, are far more disproportionately affected by gender-based violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And the number of women I work with who come to me because they're going through a brutal divorce, bloody, brutal divorce, or have left an abusive relationship, and they're sorting out the house because it's co-owned, and they're probably going to need to sell, but maybe she's buying him out, but maybe he's buying her out. And some of mine have drawn on for years. And their home has been violated, either because their spouse was having affairs, because it's been a site of abuse, because our home can be our sanctuary, our home can also be our prison. And working with these women, and I can hold their hand and look in their eye and say, let's find you your own safe space. Let's find you a house that no one can ever take away from you again. And I'm not talking about the bank, I'm talking about a male partner. And the empowerment that comes with women owning their own real estate, their own property. And I'm not just talking about women in harmful relationships. I have a wonderful, happy marriage. And from what I observe from the outside, you two are in a wonderful, happy marriage. And there's still so much empowerment when women understand their finances, when women invest, when women build wealth or intergenerational wealth and know that no matter what, they can take care of themselves and or their children. And likewise, women in real estate, in the industry, we work very long hours and we control our own hours. So I'm not going to make that, like, people say, oh yeah, it's a realtor, you know, it's great as a mom because you control your hours. And I'm like, wait, I mean, kind of. Our clients kind of control our,
Yeah.
But you do get to set the terms of what you want your business to look like. You do get to decide whether it's going to be part-time or full-time. You do have so many opportunities to be financially independent through buying and selling real estate, to open a brokerage, to sit on Treb, you know, Lisa Patel, president of Treb in the last round. Our own Katie here, you know. There's so much that you can leverage with yourself as a real estate professional, and likewise for our female clients, and really any client, but especially for women, because of all of these macro issues that, and this is what we talked about a lot in your brokerage meeting, was the big picture societal stuff. Real estate doesn't live in a bubble, you know. The gender pay gap is real, and it's exacerbated when you add in racialization, religious minoritization. Domestic violence is real. Sexism is real. All of these statistics. And Canada ranks in one of the top 3 countries in the world to live as women, which is great. And I love being Canadian and I'm proud of that. But the bar is pretty friggin' low. So we don't have, you know, news shock, we don't have gender equity yet. And I'm told that all the time. But women are equal in Canada. No, we're not. Not yet. Let's talk about the labor differential, the domestic labor load. Why? And again, it all just comes down to why, when we look at the numbers, do men so outstrip women in real estate sales? You either believe it's because men are better at real estate inherently, there's something about the Y chromosome, or we have structures and systems that hold others back and make it harder for them. So within that context, I do think that we have a lot of work to do and a long way to go to bring us to equity. But for the women in real estate, I think the sky's the limit in what we can do within this industry. I think it's extremely exciting.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was thinking on the way to the office today, the women, and I don't know if you see this in your area, but there's a lot of really strong teams that I've had, or we've both had the pleasure of getting to know over the last little while. And a lot of them, I just started realizing this, are either led by women or, I mean, actually, they're mostly led by women and they're surrounded by a lot of strong women. And I was trying to, like, going back to your whole asking the question, why is that? And I often wonder if our industry is making that transition from, you know, sales, like those hard skills, to more of the relationship. And that's kind of where the business is going. And so I wonder if that, you know, I guess a bit more of the nurturing side, but also the relationship and that part of it, that maybe I don't know if we're more natural at it. I don't want to say that, but I just wonder if those aspects that we kind of gravitate towards are helping us and maybe will help us into the future. But it's really inspiring to see these strong women really, like, making a big splash in our profession. And it's really nice that it seems to be more of a trend lately. Because I can't think of, and I know there are male run and male, like, you know, a lot of men in a team. I just can't think of any in our, at least in our area. I'm seeing a lot more women.
I would say our area is still more male teams than female. Sorry, Daniel.
Really? Okay, that's interesting.
However, I agree with what you're saying, that the female teams are very strong and strongly led. I think we're certainly socialized to lean into relationship more, nurturing, smile, you know, all these things. And so it'll be interesting in 10 years from now, you know, the general consensus is that real estate is going to be made up of either the churn and burn realtors or the high service, white glove, take care of everything, relationship built. And everybody in the middle is just going to, you know, we don't need you anymore.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if there's a gender divide along those lines 10 years from now too.
That's very true. Yeah.
Sorry, Daniel, I interrupted you though.
It's no, I think on that note, I think that's starting now. Like even the way that teams are structured, when I see male teams, and this is generalizing, they seem a lot overtly grittier. Like they're less approachable from a relationship perspective. That's not how they sell themselves because
It's so true.
it's not the vibe they want to give off.
No, it's not the type of person they're trying to attract.
No. And I mean,
No.
it's weird because if I was to start a team, I mean, first of all, I'd probably make it a team of more women than men anyway. But I don't know how, like, to me, that just isn't
Oh,
how the industry should be positioned. Oh, am I freezing? Oh,
That's a
no.
really interesting
you
point. I
froze for a
hadn't
sec,
really
but you're good.
Yeah, it's good.
It's-
That's a really interesting point that I hadn't given a lot of thought to before. But what I've noticed in real estate, my my broad statement I tell everybody is that so far I've observed that real estate draws the absolute best of humanity and the absolute worst of humanity as realtors. Like there doesn't seem to be a whole lot in between. Like they're the best people you'll ever meet who are like can give you the shirt off your back, and the
True.
people that it's like I wouldn't want to have a cup of tea with you. Like, I don't even like talking to you right now. Do you
No.
have a soul? Like, where are your morals and your values? And I think that real estate really attracts, by its nature, very extroverted people, very outgoing people. And that can lean towards super. I mean, I'm a type A individual, but that super type A. I'm trying really hard not to use offensive terms, but like there's jokes on the real estate feeds for a reason about what those kind of guys, how they dress, what they look like, what they drive, you know, and a lot of them are very good at their business. I'm not denying that. I just don't want to hang out with them ever, please, you know. And I'm thinking of several reality Netflix shows about what's it, Selling Long Island, I think, and it's just they just got slaughtered on Twitter because no one could stand any of them, you know. And yes, they were making a lot of money, but ugh. But conversely, it draws people who are very warm and love to have conversation and would love to, you know, yeah, let's get a meal, let's talk, let's have a burger, let's have a beer, whatever. And I think that you're right that most people, regardless of what's, you know, what sort of social strata you come from, you know, Ryan Serhant said nobody likes being sold to, everybody loves shopping with a friend. And I think that we're going to need to see more of that. And I think that actually, and I'm thinking this, you know, I'm thinking out loud from what you both just said, but I think that is going to help facilitate more female empowerment in the industry, because one of the worst things that we've done as women since the third wave feminism in the 60s and 70s was just adopt the patriarchy, like go into the office and just adopt, instead of bringing our own ways of doing things and our own genius and saying, you know what, you're worth something as a human being regardless of what your GCI is. You know, you don't need to earn a spot on this earth to exist. And removing the toxicity from the hustle culture, what opportunity for relation-based people to really lead the way as brokerages and to say, you know what, just like we're talking about the sexism and the racism and the jokes, clients are people and they don't want to work with jerks either any more than other agents do. So they may not know that getting in because they're just going by the billboard or whatever. But I think that in the long run, I think you're 100% right. Relationship is going to win out. Even in our current business, as things are, if you want a long-term business, you need relationship. It can't just be by the numbers.
Yeah. Transactional.
Yeah, nobody wants to feel like a transaction or, you know, a notch on your belt.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, again, it's like the people we align with. Like, I think we're all of a similar mindset in this sense. My worry, and this isn't, I mean, this is the cynic in me, is that there will forever be people who aren't the types of people we want to align with. And I think they will continue to attract people who are like them, who are the types of people that we might want to align with. I guess my worry is, that's again, the challenge and the opportunity is we want that relationship, our people bubble to keep growing, and the slow deflation of that other group as people start to realize, hopefully, like I agree with you, where this industry and all industry is going is you need more people to be focused on the softer understanding, asking questions, having conversation, relationship side of things. And as people hopefully continue to realize that's where they want to be, less and less people will align with the folks who just choose not to be like that and are comfortable bringing in piles of cash, being not the most savory of individuals. And some of them are great people, I
100%.
guess. But yeah,
No, I think that you're completely right. And I think that that's fine. I think that there are still people that believe that enslavement should be illegal. They're definitely the minority. There are still people that wish Hitler won. They're the minority, thank heavens. You're always going to have people who believe in, for lack of a better word, the old ways, the negative old ways. And you're always going to have sexists. You're always going to have homophobes. You're always going to have racists. You're always going to have bigotry and prejudice. The goal it's not a zero-sum goal. What I think is, I was joking before about in my own business and who I work with. And I've said this before, when I was in the process of getting my license, a male friend, and he didn't say this negatively, he was just making an observation, and he was correct. I think he said, "You are such an outspoken feminist. I worry you're going to lose business because of it." And I laughed, and then I said, "I'm fine with that, because anyone who doesn't want to work with me because my work is in gender equity is not someone I want to work with anyway." And I said, there are tons of agents out there for them to work with. If you want someone who's going to laugh at your sexist or racist joke, I promise you can find them, and it's not going to be hard. It doesn't have to be.
Let me bring up my racist
Let me
referral list.
I've got my
Seriously, sexist, though, I got sexist.
It's funny you say that, but in reality, like some of these really big Facebook groups of realtors, and the three of us belong to a couple of them together, I do take note of people who are defending the racist position, who are defending the sexist position. And I'm thinking, like, we've said this all along. Everybody knows this. These same people say this. It's a small industry. Your reputation is everything. It is. So maybe those are inside thoughts, friend. We don't share those thoughts outside, So they're always going to be there. I agree with you, but that doesn't mean that the industry isn't going to shift. And it shifts from multiple forces when you have society continuing to shift, with society saying, a recent poll just yesterday, day before, came out that something like over 72% of Canadians have more favorable views of immigration than they did 10 years ago. Like, our country's moving in that direction, and hopefully continues to move in that direction. And if you have people who have that different view, okay, congratulations to you. You have the right of personal thought in Canada. All these hundreds of thousands of new Canadians coming to the country, maybe not going to want to work with you, right? And so I think that as society shifts and there are more millennial agents and then Gen Z agents, and I'm not saying the boomers are more sexist than Gen Z, there's just different social mores and different understandings of what's acceptable. We're going to see some of these shifts naturally and organically, and some of it's going to be brought on us by force, exactly the things we're talking about. People aren't going to need, they're not going to need agents in 10 years the way they have, because they have iPhones and they have House Sigma. And so we have to bring our value to the table. We're not, I'm a big believer in realtors. I'm a big believer in hiring us. I think we bring a lot to the table. We have to communicate that to people. And if you're going to ride on, look at me, I am so cool, and do you see my watch, and do you see my car, and do you see how I don't wear socks with my shoes, and do you, like, I am some hot stuff, you want to work with me, babe, that's not going to convince people who can just, swipe on their phone. So I think we have to lean into our value, and that includes women and minoritized realtors realizing they bring something to the table that's not there already. And so right now, the largest single demographic buying property are single millennial women. And our industry is like clueless to this. It's not how the marketing is shaped. It's not how the scripts are taught. And so I'm like, that's fine. You guys keep doing your Mr. and Mrs. Seller. You can work with Mr. and Mrs. Seller. I'm going to keep working with the single millennial feminists, because I'm a married millennial feminist. They're my people. They find me, I find them, and we like working together.
And it makes such a difference. It makes even just your career so much more fulfilling when you can work with the people that you enjoy working with, rather than
and you become
tortured.
Friends.
Exactly. Yeah.
I remember you told me, Katie, right around when I got licensed, you said, because I was talking to you about building this and I was unsure. I'm like, this is who I want to be and this is who I want to work with, but am I going to like sink my ship before, sunk my battleship before I even started? Because now I've got transactions under my belt and I have the numbers to back. I'm like, okay, this works. But at that point, I'm looking out on the field going like, I don't know, I don't see a lot of realtors out there like me. And you told me at the time, and I've never forgotten this, you said that my business would be slower to start off than someone who was just doing 1,000 cold calls a day. Well, I guess you can't do 1,000 in a day, but the cold call, but the door knocking and not relationship based, but just, focused on numbers. And you said, you're focusing on building relationships with like-minded women and their partners and men with similar values in the queer community and so forth. And you said it'll take longer to get going, but once it gets going, it's going to be unstoppable. And your clients are going to be fiercely loyal to you. And they're going to refer their friends and their sisters and their cousins to you. And it's going to build you a business that 10 years from now is rock solid and unshakable versus one that has high numbers in the beginning, which is great. Nothing against that. But if it's not built on substance, these people aren't loyal to you. You're not their people. Yeah. You don't share anything beyond you bought a house together once. So that has borne out to be true. And I thank you for that advice back then.
Good. I'm glad.
It was the big finish. And you were right.
And it was a terrible idea. And I came here today to tell you that.
And I've got 500 calls I still need to make today now.
That's right. I have to go knock on doors with my broken foot right
broken
now.
leg.
With a broken leg. I'm going to go door knocking in the rain because you were wrong. No.
Yeah.
complete opposite. I've gotten so many cards, gifts, offers of help from my clients when they found out I broke my foot because we have relationship. They're friends now. We have shared values,
Exactly. So. No, this is amazing. Honestly, we're going to have to do like part 2 and part 3 because I think it's just really important, I think, to have these conversations. And even if one person listened to this thing the whole way through, first of all, let us know if you have, but second of all, like, it's one person at a time, just recognizing this. And especially for people that, for men, like if you're a man and you've listened to this the whole way through, that's what we need. It's so appreciated. And it's looking to what others are having to deal with on a day-to-day basis and just be open to how we're all treated and how we're all living our lives. And I just think that we need to be having more of these conversations. So let's do that.
There's she actually writes mostly on Facebook and I really enjoy her posts. And she's actually a Latina woman, but she's read as white and she's an American. Okay. And she talks about the privilege that she experiences white privilege. And people don't realize that she's Latina. And she says her catchphrase is, I use my white witch privilege all the time. And, vice versa, likewise, I carry white witch privilege. We need male witch privilege too. Male witch, that sounds like a sandwich, but it is people like my husband and like Daniel and so many amazing, I adore my broker of record and a lot of the men that I work with in my brokerage who will come along with me if I'm not comfortable picking up keys from a house, who understand, or even if they don't see it themselves, listen when I tell them. And they're like, oh, okay, got you. Yes, let's move forward with this. So male allies, I'm a huge fan of male allies. They're some of my favorite people.
We need you.
Yes.
I'm here.
I'm here. That's right. We need a male savior. That's it. I didn't mean it.
We're plaidists today, it looks like.
I noticed that. You're both in plaid.
Yeah.
I should have worn my plaid.
Got plaid privilege. Go out and lumberjack a bit.
We're going to that Canadian.
I guess it's a Canadian uniform. I should have worn denim and plaid. I'm sorry. That's my toque.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Laura. And if you guys have any clients that are looking in the Stratford area, you also do Kitchener-Waterloo, right?
I do. Yeah, I moved to Stratford from Kitchener-Waterloo. My kids still go to school there. So yeah, I'm in both worlds.
Perfect. So she's your realtor. Make sure you reach out to Laura. She's got a wealth of knowledge in that area. And we hope to visit you soon. We should come by.
Please do. Yes. Wait till the weather gets a little prettier again.
Yeah.
It's ugly midwinter weather right now. Not the pretty midwinter. But you guys can come for our winter festival in February. Oh, yeah? We basically live in Stars Hollow, like Gilmore Girls Stars Hollow. We have a ton of festivals and the Swan Parade in April. Come join us for the Swan. The bagpiper pipes the swans back to the river. So we really do live in a magical city. You should come back.
That sounds magical.
Right.
Awesome.
Bring your kids to see the swans. Yeah.
They'd love that. Perfect. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. Bye. Level up.